Hello, men of Lake Michigan Christian Center. I'm Gary Van Gilder, and I'm heading up the men's ministry. We've had two meetings right now up to this point. The next meeting is going to be January the 11th, but I wanted to catch everybody up on what happened on the first two meetings. The first meeting we got together, there were about 6 individuals at that meeting, and we were discussing service in the church, what we can do to support the ministry. And during our discussions, we got kind of involved in the generation gap and talked about the generational gaps that we have not only in our church but also in our workplace. So the second meeting we had in December, we focused in on that generation gap. And what I'm doing is including the notes from that meeting because I think it's going to be vitally important to the success of our church as a whole. Because it's important that the generations work together, that we have a diverse group of people, but a group of people that are in unity. And right now, there's a lot of differences between our younger generations and our older generations. And the only way to overcome that generational gap is to establish relationships. First and foremost, establishing the relationship with God. And once we get that established in our own lives, then we can begin to build those relationships with the people around us. So when we started looking at the generations during this meeting, we discovered that each generation is formed by the circumstances surrounding them when they were growing up as young adults and children. So the more we understand where they came from and uh, what their philosophies are, or how their how their surroundings affected them, we can understand why they're the way they are, and we can deal with them and still establish those relationships. So just to cite an example, comparing, let's say, my generation, which are the baby boomers, those people that are in their 50s and 60s, and compare that to, say, the X generation, your Generation X, which are the people in their 40s essentially. If you look at where they were brought up, they were brought up in an era where they experienced divorce, they experienced working mothers, so they didn't experience the home life that the baby boomers might have experienced. And they saw their parents being laid off from jobs after they'd been loyal to that company for decades. And as a result of that influence, the the Generation Xers, they really don't trust organizations, but they are loyal to individuals. So what they look is they look for relationships with individuals as opposed to relationships with organizations. So they're not going to be loyal to a company, they're not going to be loyal to a church, but they are going to be loyal to the people within that church that they've established a relationship with. So you can see, in order to get the generations together and in unity, it's going to require individual relationships between the members of the church and members of different generations. So that's why establishing relationships is so important. And I believe that the best way to strengthen the relationships within this church is through the men. So if we can get a strong men's ministry established with strong relationships between the men in our church from the various generations, it's going to have a tremendous impact on the entire church, and it'll really change the outlook of what we can expect God to do within this ministry. So what I'm doing is I'm including the notes from that meeting that we had in December. And what it does, it gives you a little description of what you can expect from each of the generations, and gives you an idea of if you see something that you really don't understand because they don't have the same perspective that you do. Well, if you read this and find out where they came from and what their perspectives are, it'll help you to understand why they're that way and allow you to deal with that and still establish that strong relationship with them, because it's going to be so important for our success, and it's also important for what God wants to do in the last days. It's God's will that the generations come together and do God's will in the earth. So it's vitally important. So please take a look at the notes, see what you think. Uh, and I hope to see you at the next men's meeting on January 11th at 6:30. And it'll probably be in the conference room at the church. So thanks for listening. Bye.